Start off with our sponsors. Okay. Year of Learning by Dr. Paul Koningsberg in memory of his brother, Dr. Sam Koningsberg, Shimon Ruben ben Labush, and Ed Goldberg's cousin, Nisan Hara, Nisan ben Fardosa. Paula and Bob Bromberg in memory of their dear friend Julian Smith, Yehuda ben Yisrael. Malka Mann in memory of her family murdered in the Holocaust. Harav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov, Sarah bat Ephraim, Yisrael David ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Ephraim ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Adia bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Miriam bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Pesel bas Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shalom ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shlomo Yaakov ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch, Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. The many friends of Dr. Marvin Blush, Moshe Shalom ben Yitzchak Halevi, friends of Toby Paris, Sarah Tova bat Yisrael Dov, friends of Malka Levi, Malka bat Yosef, friends of Avi Gitler, Avram Meir ben Shimon, Cheryl Scher, her children and grandchildren, in memory of her uncle, founding member of BRS, Dr. Israel Brook, Yisrael ben Harav Akiva. A week of learning, sponsored by Michael and Sharon Glass, in memory of his father, Yitzchak Tzvi ben Yechiel Michel. Also today, we have a day of learning, sponsored by Sandra and Martin Fish, in memory of her father, Yosef Meir ben Mordechai, and a day of learning by Herman and Linda Newman, in memory of his father, Shmuel ben Chaim. May Shamas have an aliyah, Kranker Rafia, Velti Yashir, Shema Taliyah, and L'chol B'nai Yisrael, a good gebenched yar. Okay, I'll be there in a moment. Okay, let's see. All right, we got to the top of Ayin Tet Amud Aleph. I'm going to just adjust my screen a little bit. Okay. I'm going to remind us that basically we saw examples, a few examples of what would establish a petach, an opening in a wall, by which then, if that were the case, whether it was, let's say, a ladders against the wall, whether it was a ledge in the wall and ladders against the ledge, a number of examples in which we would see that this would then allow two chatzerot, two courtyards, one against the other, by which to put a single eruv chatzerot and not need separate eruvei chatzerot, right? Okay, so we now are going to pick up sort of where we left off a little bit. But I'm going to have a start really back in the bottom of Ayin Chet Amud Beis, about 3 lines from the bottom. Okay, Malay Afar, where we had a charit, we had a ditch, and it talked about whether you filled it, okay, or not with certain things, right? And in this case, it talked about filling it with dirt or with stones. And therefore the Gemara asked, Va'afilu b'stama, even just in general, it was filled in without the intent, okay, of making it the two chatzerot into a single unit. V'hatnan, said the Gemara, bayit sheyimaluhu teven, if we have a house, okay, and the house is filled with straw or with stones, ubit low, okay, and one basically nullified the contents of the house. In other words, I'm not interested in that stones or that straw. Batel, okay, this Mishnah tells us that it is as if it's abandoned. Okay, the house as well. Okay, bit low and low bit low low. As we get back to our Amud for today, I intent, right? If he didn't abandon the contents of that house, the straw and the pebbles, they're not considered permanently there. And therefore, okay, how does that apply to the pebbles in the ditch? The same thing should apply. So the Gemara answered, Amar Rav Huna, Man Tana Ahalot. Who was the Tana who taught their Ahalot? In other words, Rabbi Yossi. That was Rabbi Yossi. Okay, so that may have been the view of Rabbi Yossi, that it's not so much the material which is put into either the house or applying our situation to the ditch, but it's whether or not they relinquished any rights to that material. That's the criteria. Okay, so the Gemara says now, E Rabbi Yossi, and this is where we left off. Okay, Ipcha Shma'inamai. If it were Rabbi Yossi that taught that Mishnah in Aholot, it's the opposite. The opinion that we learned. The Tanya is taught. Rabbi Yossi Omer, says Rabbi Yossi, Teven, okay, regards straw. Ve'ein atid lifnoto, and he has no, I'm going to say, intention to remove the straw in the future, right? Okay. Harehu kistam afar, that is considered like ordinary earth, ubatel, and therefore it is considered abandoned, relinquished, right? Afar, but even if he filled the house with earth, va'atid lifnoto, and his intention in the future is to remove it, okay, what happens? Harehu kistam teven, that it's no different than filling the house with ordinary straw, okay? Velo bitel, and it's not considered abandoned, it's not considered relinquished. So that's where we say it's the intent of relinquishing the material used and not necessarily what the material itself is. Ela Amar Rabbi Asi. However, Rabbi Asi now is going to comment. Okay, Man Tana Erubin, who is the Tana that rules in our Mishnah of a Reuven? Rabbi Yossi. It's Rabbi Yossi, the same Rabbi Yossi. So how can he hold one opinion in Aholot and another opinion here in Eruvin? Okay. Rav Huna bereid Rav Yoshua. Amar, and what's he saying? Okay. Rather, he's going to give another attempt to satisfy the apparent contradiction in the Mishnah. Tuma Ashabat Karamit. You're saying you're making an attempt to compare a situation where we're discussing Tuma with another discussion of Shabbat. You're saying that those contradict one another. Hanach Isur Shabbat, the Afilu Arnaki Nami Mevatel Inish. Okay, put aside, he says, the prohibitions regarding Shabbat, Why? Because that case, even the average person will simply relinquish a saddlebag, a purse or whatever, okay, if it contains the potential of any money. Now, Rav Ashi wants also to give another explanation to resolve the contradiction that would seem of the Mishnah. Rav Ashi Amar, Bayit Acharitz Karamit. You're trying to draw a comparison between the house and the ditch. Is that what you say seems to be contradictory? Bishlem Acharitz Lemitaime. Okay, it's acceptable that a ditch is ordinarily filled in. Okay, Elabayit Lemitaime Kai. But a house, is that ordinarily filled in? Okay, one doesn't do that. Okay, and so that implies that we do not necessarily have a contradiction between the Mishnah in Ahalot and our Mishnah here. Okay, although the Gemara has not necessarily ended there. Okay, new section from our Mishnah. Natan alav neser sherochav ag. If they put over the ditch a board where and they put over the ditch horizontally, such that it's more than 4 tfachim. Okay, so that covers the area of the ditch, right? And the Gemara continues, Amar Rava, this is Rava here, Lo shanu ela shenatan l'rachvo, that they taught this only when the board was put over, as I said, horizontally, across the width of the ditch. Aval l'orko, if they put this board next to, let's put it this way, vertically next to the ditch, right? And perhaps slid part of the board over the top of the ditch. Afilu kol shehu nami, even any amount there also. Shaharei mi'ato me'arba, because in that case, if you have the vertical board lying over part of the opening in the ditch, you've reduced, right, the 4 tfachim width of the ditch, and if it's less than 4 tfachim, it's no longer a separate reshus. Okay. Now, furthermore, next part of our mission, l'chein shtei gezus taraot zo keneged zo. So let's say now we're dealing with the 2 balconies, the 2 porches, one next to one another. Okay, what do we have in this case? Amar Rabba. Again, Rabba is suggesting the following. Ha, the Amar zu keneged zo, and the fact that you said it's one balcony parallel, I'm going to say, to the other one, yes. Zu shelo keneged zo, lo. But if the balconies are not parallel, if they're at different heights, right? Zo lamala mizo, one above this, nami, here also, that would be problematic. Lo amran ela sheyesh bein lazeh shloshat tfachim. No, says the Gemara, we implied that this is only a situation where these one balcony is within 3 tfachim of the other, implying that through the vud, it's as if we could say they were on the same level. So on 79A2, in the notes, diagram 1, we can see the first example where the two balconies are parallel one to another. In diagram 2, okay, diagram B, we can see where one is slightly above the other. Okay. Now, the question there is it within 3 tfachim? Then it can be considered by the wood to be equal. So going back to our text, Lo amran ela sheyesh ben ze lezeh shlosha tfachim. Aval ein ben ze lezeh shlosha. But if there is not 3 tfachim, okay, between the two, like in diagram B, or better still, look at diagram D, okay, trying to show the question of the distance, right? Gizuz tara akumahi. We would say it's call it a crooked balcony, and therefore, okay, we cannot make it a single unit. That ends that particular Mishnah. Our new Mishnah, okay, is going to pick up on a somewhat new topic, but it actually was something we had cited earlier in our discussion. We had talked about the issue of hay, right? And now we're dealing with the fact that that previous text had cited actually this Mishnah using the example of a haystack as a mechitza, as a partition. And so we get now to this specific Mishnah. Matniten. Our Mishnah teaches, Mat ben shebein shtei chatzerot, if you have a haystack between 2 courtyards, Gavoa asarat tfachim, the height of the haystack is 10 tfachim, ma'arvin shnayim, then the 2 courtyards must each make their own eruv chatzerot.
That's a good one.
Ve'ein ma'arvin echad, okay, and they cannot make a single eruv chatzerot, right? But what happens? Says the Mishnah, Elu ma'achilin mikan, these can bring animals to eat from the haystack on one side. Ve'elu ma'achilin mikan, and these can, from the second chatzer, can bring their animals to eat from the haystack on the other side. What happens? Maybe nitma'et hateven me'asrat tfachim. If as a result, the height of the haystack is reduced less than 10 tfachim, ma'arvin echad ve'en ma'arvin shnayim, says the Mishnah. Then they may establish a single eruv chatzeros for the 2 of them, and they don't need 2 separate eruvei. Okay?
Right.
All right. Gemara. Now our Gemara has Amar Rav Huna. Rav Huna, however, is going to make a qualification. Ubilvad shelo yitain letoch kupato v'ya'achi. And that we said that the animals may eat from the haystack on the condition, says Rav Huna, that the residents of the chatzer don't take from the haystack themselves, put it into baskets, and then feed the animals. So what happens? Ula okme shari. Okay, so to stand the animal there by the haystack, that's permitted as a question. Vaha amar Rav Huna, amar Rabbi Chanina. But we say, didn't Rav Huna in the name of Rabbi Chanina say, Ma'amid Adam et behemto al gabe asavim b'Shabbat, that a person can bring his animal and stand the animal on grass, which the animal is going to eat, and do so on Shabbat. Ve'ein ma'amid Adam et behemto al gabe muksa b'Shabbat. But a person cannot make his animal stand on something that is mukta, okay, that is not, say, available, not appropriate for Shabbat usage, okay, on Shabbat. Why? The ka'im la ba'apa, because the person stands in front of the face of the animal, va'azla va'achla, and then the animal goes and eats the item on its own. Okay. Now, the Gemara continues, v'lo yitain l'toch kupato teven, okay, and therefore he is not to put the item, let's say the straw, okay, into a basket and feed the animal that way. Right? Is that what we're saying according to the Mishnah? Vahatanya. But wait a minute, says the Gemara. We have a Braita that teaches, Bayit shebein shtei chatzerot, if we have a house that's between two courtyards, umil'ohu teven, and they fill the house with straw, ma'arvin shnayim ve'ein ma'arvin echad. We say that the two courtyards must each make their own eruv, and they cannot join in a single eruv. Zenotem letoch kupato v'achil. In that case, one can take straw out of the house, put it in a basket, and give animals to eat. V'zenotem letoch kupato v'achil. And from the other chatzer, they may take straw out of the house, put it in the basket, and give the animal to eat. Nitma'et hatevet me'asarat tvachim. And if the amount of straw in the house is reduced to lower than 10 tvachim, shnehem asurim, then the inhabitants of the two courtyards both are prohibited from carrying anything in the courtyard. Ketzad hu oseh. How then does one do this? What must one do? And here we get a little bit more detail into the whole concept of relinquishing one's rights, okay, vis-a-vis the courtyard. Noel et beito, one locks his home, umevatel et rishuto, and he relinquishes his rights of carrying in the courtyard. Hu asur, okay, and therefore we say that individual is prohibited from carrying in the courtyard. V'chavero mutar, and a neighbor is permitted. Now, v'chein ata omer, and says the Gemara, and likewise one would say, beguv, with a pit or a pile, shel teven of straw, shebein shnei tchumei Shabbat, that exists between two Shabbat areas, precincts. Katani mihat, it's taught nevertheless, zenotem letoch kupato v'yachil, v'zenotem letoch kupato v'yachil. Here it's out, but it's taught. One can put it into his basket and let the animal eat and feed the animal, and this one can put it into his basket and feed the animal. Amre, and they say, in this case, buy it, kevan de'ika mechitzot v'tikra. Okay, so what's the difference? Perhaps they're going to say, okay, that the house, okay, that has normal, we'll say, partitions or walls and a ceiling, ki mifchat, when the contents, the straw in that house is reduced, min kara le milta, then this is recognized. This is something we see, okay? Because the straw no longer reaches close to the ceiling, but is reduced, right? Hacha, here in our case, when we're talking about a pile or a pit of straw, lo min kara le milta, then it's not recognized, right? And therefore there is a difference in that comparison. Now, a new piece again from our Mishnah. Nitma'et hateven me'asurat tvachim, shnehem asurim. Our writer said, right, that if the straw is reduced in the house less than 10 tvachim, though inhabitants of both chatzerot are prohibited from carrying. Ha-asara share. The implication is that if it's 10 tvachim, they're permitted. V'afal gav demidle tikra tuva, even though it may be revealed more space above, okay, above the straw towards the ceiling. Shmamina, therefore we learn from this, mechitzot, she'en megiot letikra, shman mechitzot, that partitions that may not reach the height of the ceiling are still considered valid partitions. Now, Amar Abaye, Hacha b'bayit shlosha asar chaser mashu askim. According to Abaye, what we're talking about here, okay, is a house where the ceiling is slightly under 13 plus tfachim. Okay, v'teven asara, and the height of the straw in the house reached 10 tfachim. Now, a different explanation. For Rav Huna, the Rav Yoshua Amar, what does he say? Afilu tema b'bayit asura. Right? Let's say that even if you're going to say that the house itself, the ceiling is only 10 tfachim, and let's roll over, v'teven shiva umashu, and the height of the pile of straw inside the house only reaches 7 plus tfachim. Because of the wood, again, we would argue that it's as if it connects to the top of the house. The kol pachot mishlosha kilavud dami. Why? Because anything less than 3 tfachim is considered acceptable, valid partition. Now, Gemara has a question here. Bishlema le'abaye. That's acceptable how Abaye explained. Hainu dikatani me asara, because it's very clear that his explanation was such that the pile or the straw reached 10 tfachim. Ela the Rav Huna bereid the Rav Yoshua, mai me asara. Okay, what about the fact for Rav Huna, the son of Rabbi Yeshua? Okay, why did the Braita have to refer to 10? Mitorat asara is the answer. Okay, what we say is that it's reduced from its appropriate status, its legal status of 10. That's what he meant. Okay, now our Braita taught again, Shnehen Asurim, that the inhabitants, the residents of both Chatzerot are forbidden, right? Forbidden from carrying. right? But they're also forbidden from taking more straw and reducing the amount of straw, right? Shmamina, what does this come to tell us? Diurin habain b'Shabbat asurin, that if we have a situation where additional residents of that chatzer arrive on Shabbat, okay, if they come to that chatzer on Shabbat, what happens? Asurim. They prohibit the, let's call them existing or earlier residents from carrying in that chatzer.
Yeah.
Okay, so the Gemara answers, Dilma de ima et me et mo. Perhaps it's possible that they reduced, right, from the day before. Okay, that the haystack was reduced based on Friday. Now, Gemara asks a question here. Ketzad hu oseh, right? Right? So what happens then? Okay. No, el et beito, umevatel rishuto. Its answer was that the person, says the Mishnah, locks his house and relinquishes his rights in the courtyard. Tarte, asks the Gemara, one has to do both. Hachi ka'amar. This is what it means to tell us. Oh no el et beito. Either he locks his house, o mevatel et rishuto, or he relinquishes his rights in the courtyard. V'ibayet ema le'olam tarti. And if you want, I might say that he always needs to do both. Kevan dedash be. Why? Because he's become accustomed, okay, to normally carrying out things from his house into the courtyard. And maybe this particular Shabbos, let's say he forgot to join into the Eruv. But out of routine, what happens? Ate letiltue. He may normally just come to carry. That's why, according to the second Lashon, the Abayat Ema, you would need to do both. Okay. Now back to our Mishnah. Hu asur b'chavero mutar. He is prohibited from carrying, and his, let's call it neighbor, right? The other person, his friend, is permitted. Pshita, isn't that obvious? Says the Gemara. Lo tzricha. No, we needed to say it. Why? Dahadar ida. Because the other one may come back. What does it mean, come back? Ubatile. And then that person would relinquish his rights lechavle, to his neighbor, to his friend, to the one who had, I'm going to say, initially relinquished the rights. Vahakamashmala. And therefore here it comes to teach us de'en mevatlin v'chozrin, that one, we do not allow, okay, person A, resident A of the Chatzer to relinquish his rights to resident B, and then flip it. Resident B would then relinquish his rights back to resident A. Okay. Now, Gemara continues back again, okay, with the following part of the Mishnah. V'chein ata omer beguv shel teven shebein shnei tchumei Shabbat. And likewise you say, regarding a pit or a pile of straw that's found between two Sabbath precincts, let's say. Right? Pshita, isn't that obvious again? Lo tzricha. No, we need it, the Rabbi Akiva, to the view of Rabbi Akiva. The Amar, Tchumim Deoraita, because Rabbi Akiva holds that Tchum Shabbat is a Torah mandated requirement. Mahu Dateni. So therefore, what are you saying here? Ligzor, that maybe we need to make a decree, right? Dilma ate le'echlufe, okay? That perhaps, okay, we might say, therefore, that they might come and switch the straw from one tchum to another tchum, right? Kamash Malan comes to teach us that such a gzera is not required, is not necessary. Another Mishnah as we continue. Matnitin says our Mishnah. Okay, as we continue with this Mishnah, we're going to change the topic a little bit and switch to a discussion not of Eruvei Chatzerot, but of Shituf Nebuot. Now remember, we did have previous Gemara that talked about the fact that there could be a difference between what was used as the food stuff, right? According to that Gemara, we saw it was more common to use bread to make an Erev Chatzeros, and more common to use a keg or a barrel of wine for a Shituf Mabuot. Okay? We saw the Gemara talked about if two people put the stuff together in the barrel, things like that. So based on that, I think as we go into the next Mishnah, we can understand it a little bit easier. Ketzad mishtatfin b'mabui, asks the Mishnah. How do we make a shituf mabuot? Okay, that the at least two chatzerot, if not more, that have openings into a alleyway, a mabui, how do they join together, right? And also remember that we said that it would appear that shituf mabuot takes precedence over an eruv chatzerot. So if the two or three chatzerot were to join together, that would seem to imply that the individual chatzerot would not have to make their own eruv.
Right.
So continuing now, maniach et chavit, they place the keg or the barrel. That's why I reminded us that they often used a barrel of wine, right? V'omer, and they say, Harei zo lechol b'nei mabui, that this is for all of the inhabitants, right? All of the individuals, okay, that, let's say live in Chatzerot off this courtyard. Umizakeh lehem. And they basically then want to say merit them, or they confer ownership, okay, for them. But I like to think they give them the privilege of saying it, al yadei beno, by means through one's adult son, ubito, or adult daughter, hagdoli, va'al yadei avdo v'shivchato ha'ivri, or by means of a Hebrew male or female servant, va'al yadei ishto, or by means of one's wife. Aval eino mizakeh, lo al yadei beno ubito haktani. But according to the Mishnah, one cannot confer ownership or grant the privilege of being part of the shituf mabaot through a minor son or a minor daughter. V'lo ayadei avdo v'shifchato haKanaanim, and not by means of a Gentile servant or male or female servant. Mepnei sheyadan kiyado. Why? Because those minors or those servants are considered an extension, I'll say, at the moment, of the master. Okay, they are basically, okay, they don't have any rights of ownership. Okay, and therefore they are under his control. Now, Gemara says, Amar Rav Yehuda. Okay, Chavit shel shitufei mabuot, as a qualification, this barrel that's going to be used for joining the alleyway, tzrich lahagbiyah min hakarka tefa. One must raise this barrel at least a tefach, at least a handbreadth off the ground. Amar Rabbah, and there's a little bit of difference here among the Mefarshim, whether it's simply off the, let's say, floor of the alleyway, or if it's more, in other words, it has to be above the height of other barrels that might be in the alleyway. But that's not a key issue here. Instead, we find Rabbah saying, Hani tarte mili, okay? Namely, he says, okay, that there were two laws, or two things, Sabe de Pampadita Amrihu, that the elders of Pampadita said, Chadaha, one was this, namely about lifting, right, the barrel for Shituf Mabuhut, Idach the other, Hamikadesh, right, one who makes Kiddush, right, Im Ta'am Lo Logmav Yatsa, if he tastes at least a complete mouthful, okay, of the liquid, he's fulfilled his obligation. V'im lav lo yatsa, and if he didn't, he has not fulfilled his obligation. Now, since we mentioned the elders of Pampadita, another citation. Amar Rav Chaviva, says Rav Chaviva, Ha nami sabe de Pampadita amrihu. This also was said by the elders of Pampadita. The Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel is said by Rav Yehuda in the name of Shmuel, Osin Medura L'chaya b'Shabbat, that it's permissible to make a, let's call it a flame with a small flame, okay, to kindle a flame. Medura actually today in modern Hebrew is like a campfire, okay, but to create some flame, perhaps in an oven or in a fireplace, right, to be able to heat water for a woman who gives birth. Savur mina l'chaya. This seems appropriate, logical, okay, understood regarding a woman who is giving birth. And yes, l'chola lo, but from someone who is sick, no. B'yamot hagishamim, and in the rainy season, in the winter, yes. B'yamot hachama, in the hot season, in the summer, no. And the Gemara picks up Itma, but it was said about this, right? The following: Amar Rav Chia bar Avin Amar Shmuel, says Rav Chia bar Avin in the name of Shmuel. Hakiz dam v'nitztaneh. If one had blood drawn, bloodletting, remember, was a common practice medically in that time, and felt cold, right? Osin lo midura b'Shabbat. It's permitted to make a fire on Shabbat for that person. Va'afilu b'tikvat Tammuz, even in the season of Tammuz. In other words, even in the summer. Amar Amemar, and the Memar says furthermore, Ha nami sabe de pompadita amrinu. Here is something else that the elders of Pompadita said. The Itmar, as it was said, Ezohi Asherah Stam. Okay, what do we say is considered a tree that was worshipped as part of Avodah Zarah? Amar Rav, says Rav, Kol Shemashmarte Avodat Galilim or Avodah Zarah Shomrin Ota. Okay, any tree in which there were those who the Misharte Avodah Zarah, those attendants, those servants. In other words, it could have been priests, it could have been others that normally worship the tree, that they protect and guard the tree. Let's roll over a tiny bit. Ve'en to'amim miperuteha. And they don't taste any of its fruit. Ushmuel Amar, and Shmuel, however, says, Kigon de Amre, as the attendants say, Hani Tamre Lishikra de Beinitzarfe, that these dates are for the drink, okay, for the beer of the house of Nitzarfe. In other words, the temple of Nitzarfe, the Shatule Biyom Chagam, that people would drink it on the day of their holiday. Amar Amemar, and the Memar therefore says, Va'amrule Sabe de Pompadita, and the elders of Pompadita said, Hilchata Kevate de Shmuel. They said that the law accords to Shmuel. And we're going to stop there, okay? Because our next material comes back to the topic of Shituf Mabuot and raises a challenge about the question of lifting it off the ground. And if that, who has to do that? So we'll pick up there tomorrow. Okay? All right, everybody, take care and stay well.
Thank you.
Okay. So long.
Have a good day.